Just making a quick little video on some Bible trivia, but first I'll be reading from John chapter 8, verses 1 through 8. Then they all went home, but Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. At dawn he appeared again in the temple courts, where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. And the law of Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. Now what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. Then they kept on questioning him. He straightened up and said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. See, in a lot of movies and art depictions, when Jesus is writing on the ground, it's often depicted as sand, that Jesus is making that writing in the sand with his finger. But if you look into it, and if you look into the layout of the temple and the temple courts, you'll know that the ground there is actually made of stone. When Jesus was doing the writing with his finger, he was doing it on stone. And it's funny. What else has to do with stone? When we look back in the story of Exodus, when God is giving the commandments to Moses, the 10 Commandments, God writes them on tablets of stone. So when they're quoting the law at Jesus and questioning him on it, Jesus stooping down on the ground and writing on the ground that stone with his finger, that was Jesus indirectly saying to them, whose finger do you think wrote that law that you're quoting? Because Jesus was God, who came and walked among us and died on that cross for our sins so we can be forgiven. And speaking of forgiveness, the woman caught in adultery found just that. Continuing from chapter 8 into verse 11, starting in verse 9. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left, with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." See, they knew they couldn't stone her because Jesus had told them, let one of you who is without sin cast the first stone. But none of them were without sin. And that's why the older ones left first, because they were smart enough to realize that they were not without sin. And the younger ones caught on and they left. But Jesus, he was without sin. Not only was he without sin, but Jesus was God in the flesh. If he had any right to stone her and condemn her, it would have definitely been him. But instead, he chose forgiveness, because Jesus knew that his sacrifice was going to pay for that woman's sins, just as the rest of us. And because of his sacrifice, and the sacrifice he knew he was going to make, and the sacrifice that he did make, we can be forgiven. Though Jesus can condemn us, he chooses not to, and commands us to leave our life of sin. He gives us the ability to leave our life of sin because he took the punishment for our sins on himself. He who knew no sin became our sin. And just as he said, he came not to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law. and he wrote that law. And that's a really cool fact. And there were a lot of things that Jesus did that, showed that he was God. But this one is a cool hidden gem, I think. As the tablets were wrote in stone and the Pharisees were quoting those tablets, Jesus wrote on the ground, made a stone, as if to say, whose finger do you think wrote that law that you're quoting? Anyways, guys, I hope this has blessed you, and I hope it's been food for thought. Hope to see you in the next video, God be willing. God bless you all.